Welcome back, my friends. I told you guys recently that I have quit resistance training, or at the very least like scaled back very significantly on resistance training in order to pursue more like animal flow, primal movement, yoga mobility style stuff. And by far the most common question that I've gotten has been, aren't you afraid you're going to lose muscle? So today I wanted to address that question and talk about why I'm not particularly afraid that I'm going to lose muscle and all of kind of the science and strategy behind maintaining muscle when you are scaling back on resistance training. I want to read you guys one of the comments that I actually got because I feel like it kind of perfectly summarizes kind of everyone's thoughts and feelings about this. And this is kind of the perspective that I'm doing this video from. So just kind of to summarize, they essentially said, I recently stopped deliberate exercise so I can focus on what I wanted my strength for, i.e. yard work, house projects, etc. But mentally there was fear around letting that hour of my day go towards more productive things because I was worried about body composition. But long term, it just doesn't feel right to just do deliberate workout videos forever. I think many people are scared to quit exercising or take time off once they get into a routine and see results. It makes more sense to actually use my strength to do things. I've taken about a month off, my clothes still fit the same, I don't have a scale that tells me anything, but at least my biceps and glutes were sore after using the weed whacker for 30 minutes. So yeah, I think there's a lot of people out there that, you know, you've adopted this workout routine. For a lot of people that's been resistance training, and for anyone that's gone from like not resistance training to resistance training regularly, you know how quickly and amazingly your body will transform. Like once you start building muscle and losing fat, like the recomp can be pretty significant, and that in itself can make you really scared to do anything else because you did this one thing, resistance training, and got amazing results. And so in your head you're like, okay, this is the thing that I have to do to get these results, and if I stop doing it, I will lose the results. And so people get stuck doing this same workout modality, workout after workout, month after month, year after year, and they are afraid to branch out from it because it's what worked in the first place. But I think one of the most important takeaways here, and I'll just lead the video off with this, is that the thing that you have to do to get results is not usually the thing that you have to do to maintain the results. Getting results takes usually a lot more time and dedication and effort and specificity than simply maintaining the results. And we see this in nutrition all the time, right? Like if you're trying to actively lose fat, you have to put yourself in a calorie deficit. But once you get to where you want to be, you can just eat at maintenance rather than a calorie deficit. And if you're thinking, but Marissa, like I put myself in a calorie deficit to lose weight, I was eating 1,500 calories a day, I lost the weight, but now I have to keep eating 1,500 calories a day to maintain the weight, so I'm still in the calorie deficit. What are you talking about? You need to reverse diet. ReverseDieting101.com. My course is open for registration. Please fix your metabolism. If you have a healthy metabolism and you lose fat in a healthy, sustainable way, then once you get to where you want to be, you can just go back to your maintenance calories in order to maintain your weight. So the point being, the thing that you have to do to get the results is not necessarily the thing that you have to do to maintain the results. And this equally applies to resistance training. So if you want to know how you can scale back on your resistance training without losing muscle so that you can maybe dabble in other forms of exercise or just not have to be training so hard and so much all the time, keep watching this video. Maintaining muscle with decreased training comes down to 3 major things. 1 is using the muscles enough. 2 is eating enough protein, and 3 is eating enough total calories. Let's break that down. Number 1, using the muscles enough. First, it's important to know that building muscle, really hard. You have to do enough to instruct your body to put its energy and resources into growing new tissue. And your body has a lot of other biological processes that it's going to prioritize over building new tissue, like, you know, keeping your heart pumping and your lungs expanding and your metabolism functioning. So you essentially have to be giving it enough of a stimulus for your body to understand that while yes, those basic biological functions are still important and it is still gonna do those, it also should put energy and resources into building new muscle tissue because that is also important. And you're telling it it's important by lifting heavy. But with maintaining muscle, you're not having to convince your body to build new tissue. All you have to do is convince your body that it's worth hanging on to the tissue that it already has, which is going to require much less energy and resources from your body. Essentially, it's a lot easier to maintain muscle that you've already built than it is to build it in the first place. So how much do you need to do to gain versus maintain? Thankfully, this has actually been studied. A study by Bickel et al. Took a group of subjects and first had them undergo a regular resistance training program for 16 weeks. So 3 days a week, they were doing 3 sets, 8 to 12 reps of a certain exercise. Then they measured the increase in strength and hypertrophy in that muscle group. Then they went into phase 2 of the experiment, where they scaled back on their training. They divided the subjects into 3 groups. Group 1 did 1/3 of the volume that they were doing to build the muscle. So they still did 3 sets, 8 to 12 reps, but they only did it 1 day a week instead of 3 days a week. Group 2 did 1/9 of the volume that they were doing in phase 1. So they also scaled back to 1 day a week and then scaled back to only 1 set on that 1 day. And then the third group did 0 training whatsoever. For the younger individuals in the study, so like the 20 to 35-year-old range, they actually still saw increases in strength and hypertrophy in the 1/3 training group. So even though they scaled back their training by 2/3, essentially, they still were able to make progress in the gym. The second group that scaled back to 1/9 of their original training were effectively able to maintain the gains that they had seen in strength and hypertrophy in the first phase of the experiment, and then the group with no training ended up going back to baseline, so where they were as far as strength and muscle size before they started their first resistance training regimen. For older individuals in the 60 to 75-year-old range, they maintained strength in both the 1/3 and 1/9 training groups, but they did lose some muscle mass. So what does this mean for all of us that want to scale back on our training? What can we take away from this study? First is that typical volume for hypertrophy training, so when you're actively trying to grow your muscle, is between 10 and 20 sets per muscle group per week. So 1/9 of that would be about 1 to 2 sets per muscle group per week. That is what our group of younger-ish individual subjects were able to maintain with in the study. Now, this study is the commonly cited study when people discuss this topic of muscle maintenance. And by commonly, I mean it's like one of the only studies that people cite because there's not actually much else out there right now that is super helpful or enlightening on this topic. And obviously there are kind of a lot of, not necessarily gaps in the study, like the study was done well, but there's just a lot of unanswered questions. And unfortunately, I don't have the answers to the questions because I don't have the studies either. But I think these are some important discussion topics at the very least. The first question is the minimum for maintenance 1/9 of your total training volume before you scale back? Or is it just 1 set per muscle group, right? Because if you're on like the really high end of training, like if you're doing 20 sets or more of a certain muscle group and then you decide to scale back, can you just scale back to 1 set, or do you have to stick to closer to 1/9? To be fair, that's not gonna be a huge variation. It's gonna be a difference between like 1 or 3 sets per week, maybe 3. Like you're doing 27 sets per muscle group per week already, you're probably maybe doing too much, but it's still a question that would kind of be nice to have an answer to. I think in my research into this before I made this video, my main takeaway is that the biggest variation here kind of comes with your level of training. If you're a relative beginner, so if you've only been lifting like super consistently for 0 to 2 years, then you need significantly less volume to maintain your muscle moving forward than a more advanced lifter who's been lifting consistently for more than 2 or 3 years. And I emphasize the word consistently here because there's a lot of people that have been lifting for 5+ years, but if you haven't been doing it super consistently for all of that time, then you might not be like a super advanced lifter, at least by biological muscle growth standards. But if you're someone who's just been like super dedicated in the gym for the last 5 years and have built a significant amount of muscle, you might need a little bit more volume to maintain that muscle if you want to scale back. So that is kind of the guideline that I would use here to answer that question as to whether or not it's 1/9 or 1 set. If you're more of a beginner, you can err on the lower side. If you are more of an advanced lifter, you're gonna wanna err on being a little bit more, not aggressive, but just add 1 extra set in there, you know? And then another huge question that the study doesn't answer is what the sliding scale looks like when it comes to age. Because this study did separate the subjects into a younger group and an older group, and we don't have any data in the middle. So we have the group that was 20 to 35 and then the group that was 60 to 75. And we saw that the group that's 20 to 35, they were able to maintain muscle and strength on much lower volume. The older group did lose muscle with both 1/9 and 1/3 of their original training volume. So if you're somewhere in the middle there, if you're like 45, how much training do you actually need in order to maintain muscle? Based on the current literature, I don't think we have a definitive answer of like, you need 1/5 of the volume. But based on the current literature, what we do know is that the older you get, the harder it is to build and maintain muscle mass. So again, I would kind of just look at this as a sliding scale. If you are in the 60 to 75 range, you probably should be regularly resistance training kind of no matter what, because especially as you age, the amount of muscle you have on your body is very predictive of longevity. So by that age, you might actually want to stick to the bare minimum recommended for hypertrophy of about 10 sets per muscle group per week. But again, if you're like 20 to 35, you could probably get away with scaling back to about 1 set per muscle group per week, or 1/9 of whatever volume you were doing before. And if you're somewhere in the middle of the ages, then somewhere in the middle of the volume is gonna be what you want to focus on. So, you know, if you're in the like 45 to 50 range, maybe you wanna do 5 or 6 sets per muscle group per week. Again, we don't have definitive answers here, but this is also something that you can play around with yourself. There's also obviously genetic variation. Some people build muscle a lot easier than others. If you're a hard gainer, then you're probably going to have to do a little bit more volume to maintain the muscle that you've built. So I think even when looking at studies like this, or literally looking at any study, this is a whole rant for another day, but it's important to remember that you are not a lab rat. Humans are also not lab rats. There's a lot of genetic variation, and so you can look at a study, look at the takeaway, apply it to yourself, but make sure you're looking at how your body responds to that application. There's always a chance you're a genetic outlier when it comes to whatever this thing is that you are applying to yourself, or not even an outlier, but you know, you're just not the average. And when it comes to humans, there's often a very wide variation. The bell curve is very low and very wide, and so you might not get the average response, because most people are not going to get the average response, because most people are not under the middle of the bell curve at the average. So if you're looking to scale back on your training, you're concerned about losing muscle, I would just test out what the average is for you. So again, kind of based on your age range, pick a volume that seems appropriate on that sliding scale, test it out for a couple months, and then make sure you're evaluating. Take progress pictures, take measurements. If you have a scale that can measure your body fat percentage, make sure you're using that, like multiple metrics of progress so that you can see if you are appearing to lose muscle. But lastly, with the study, I want to point out kind of a confounding variable that was not really measured or discussed in the study, and that is nutrition intervention. Like, this was an exercise-based study. They didn't also give them a nutrition program. And the thing is, with older individuals, they need to be consuming much more protein to maintain muscle than younger individuals. And as far as I can tell with that study, this was not accounted for. And so if, let's say, on average, the older individuals were eating significantly less protein than they needed to maintain their muscle, then it's possible that with adequate protein intake, they would have been able to maintain their muscle on 1/3 of the training volume or 1/9 of the training volume. You know, we don't know what happened here, and it makes a lot of sense that if you cut back on your training volume, you're gonna be less hungry. You're probably going to crave less protein. And so very easily possible that everyone's protein intake just tanked when they cut back on their resistance training, and that could be a huge factor in whether or not older individuals were able to maintain their muscle mass. Do I think that if protein intake were accounted for and regulated in this study that it would have completely changed the results? No, it does make sense that older individuals need a little bit more resistance training in order to maintain muscle mass, but I do think the results may not have been as stark, possibly, if they had accounted for protein. Again, it's just another question that the study brings up that I would love to see more research on in the future. So second thing that you have to do to maintain your muscle is eat enough protein. Eating protein is inherently anabolic, meaning it stimulates muscle protein synthesis, like just by itself, and it also improves recovery. So eating enough protein is going to be very helpful. A 2020 review by Park et al. Says that it is well established that intake of dietary protein stimulates an anabolic response, mainly via the stimulation of protein synthesis by essential amino acids. Especially a moderate to large amount of protein or essential amino acid intake similarly increases muscle protein synthesis in young and older adults. And in another 2018 article published in the Journal of the International Society of Sports Nutrition, the esteemed Brad Schoenfeld and Alan Argonne said that research suggests that a higher consumption of protein can significantly boost your body's anabolic response. So if you're cutting back on your resistance training, you're gonna get significantly less of an anabolic stimulus from the resistance training. And so just making sure to be eating enough protein. Don't like overdo it on protein. Like eating way too much protein is not really gonna be helpful, but making sure you're eating enough is at least gonna add a little bit more anabolic stimulus in there that's going to help maintain your muscle mass. It absolutely does not replace resistance training. Like you can't just eat a ton of protein, never do resistance training and expect to grow a ton of muscle, but it is just important if you are cutting back on resistance training and want to maintain muscle. So how much protein do you need to maintain muscle? My recommendation for this is the same as my eternal recommendation for pretty much anything all the time, and that is approximately 0.7 to 1 gram of protein per pound of lean body mass. Your lean body mass is not your total body weight, it's your body weight minus the pounds of fat on your body. So if you know your body fat percentage, then it's just the other percentage times your body weight. So if you're 100 pounds and 25% body fat, then 75 pounds is your lean mass. So you do 0.7 to 1 gram per 75 pounds. So 0.7 to 1 gram per pound of lean mass. The only caveat here is the older you get, the more protein you want to be consuming. So if you are on the older side, definitely lean closer to the 1 gram per pound, and you could even go up to about 1.4 grams per pound of lean body mass. And then lastly, to maintain muscle, you need to make sure you're eating enough. What does this mean? This just means eating at maintenance. If you're scaling back on resistance training, want to maintain your muscle, and eating in a calorie deficit, good luck. When you're in a calorie deficit, your body is going to be looking to draw energy from other sources to meet its basic biological energy needs. One of the sources that it can draw from is body fat, but another source it can draw from is muscle. And if you're not actively resistance training, your body has no reason to hang on to that muscle mass. And so it is going to start using your muscle to replace the calories that you are not eating. And if you're not actively lifting as much, you're really putting yourself in danger of your body sourcing a lot of that energy from muscle, because muscle is an energy expensive tissue. It does cost the body more energy to hang on to muscle than it does fat. And so when your body's trying to compensate for a calorie deficit, it's gonna be wanting to get rid of the tissue that's also using up more of that energy. And this is why I always recommend resistance training instead of cardio if you are trying to lose body fat, because if you aren't leaning heavy on the resistance training, your body's just gonna start burning up your muscle as well, and you might actually end up at a higher body fat percentage than you started. But that's a rant for another video. We've covered that in other videos. Not launching to that long rant right now. We're gonna just move on. On the flip side of a calorie deficit, a calorie surplus might actually be super helpful in maintaining your muscle mass, but you're probably gonna end up gaining extra body fat too. So if you don't care about gaining extra body fat, sure, eat some extra calories. If you wanna maintain your current body composition while scaling back, then you're not gonna wanna eat in a calorie surplus. So how do you eat at maintenance? First thing you can do is just eat intuitively. If your hunger and satiety cues are on point, you should just be able to eat, and your body will naturally have you eat at maintenance. I do have a whole video where I walk you through how to learn how to eat intuitively. If that's something that you're interested in, I'll leave a link to that down in the description box below. Or just search MissFitAndNerdy, how to eat intuitively. The other thing you can do is make sure you're tracking your weight, tracking your calorie intake, and then just adjust your calorie intake accordingly. If you notice your weight trending up, bring your calories down a little bit. If you notice your weight trending down, bring your calories up a little bit. And those are the 3 main things that you need to consider if you are wanting to scale back on resistance training without losing muscle. But I feel like this leaves a lot of room for questions. So let's talk about some takeaways. First and foremost, a little bit more insight into the nutrition side of things. If you're trying to maintain your body composition, which is generally people's goal if they're thinking about maintaining muscle mass, then obviously you're going to want to maintain your muscle mass, but you need to adjust your calorie intake accordingly. So how you adjust your training is obviously going to affect how you adjust your calories. If you don't want to have to adjust your calories, then you need to make sure you're maintaining the same level of calorie burn, even if you're changing your activity type, right? So let's say you're going from lifting heavy 5 days a week to wanting to maybe lift 1 day a week to get your, one set in. If you were to just go from lifting 5 days a week to 1 day a week and you didn't do anything with your nutrition, you'd end up in a huge calorie surplus, you'd gain a ton of fat. So it's just important to kind of think through what you're replacing it with, whether or not it's roughly equivalent to your previous amount of calorie burn. But this is also where tracking your weight and tracking your calorie intake moving forward is gonna be really helpful so that you can kind of see how your body's responding and adjust accordingly. Or again, just if you're really in tune with your body, you can eat intuitively and that's probably gonna work out. The next thing is that when it comes to training volume to maintain muscle, volume does not necessarily have to mean literally scaling back by 1/9 of the traditional resistance training type exercise. There are other ways of moving your body that still activate and stimulate the muscle in a way that will prevent the body from thinking that, it's useless tissue that doesn't need to be stored on your body, and essentially tell your body like, okay, we need to maintain this muscle tissue to do the activities that this human body is trying to do. For example, if let's say you've built your shoulders through overhead presses and you've been training shoulders twice a week and you've been doing 9 sets a week of shoulders, you don't necessarily need to do 1 set a week of overhead presses in order to maintain your exact muscle size in your shoulders. Instead, maybe instead of doing any overhead presses, you start learning how to do handstands. Very different type of activity, but still an activity that's gonna tell your body like, hey, this muscle's really helpful and really important, and we don't want to lose any of it. And this obviously makes it difficult to figure out like exact volume, because you can't really go, okay, I was doing 9 sets of overhead presses, now I'm gonna do 1 handstand a week. But you can kind of think of it as a sliding scale of muscle activation. And muscles can be activated in a lot of different ways. Traditionally, when it comes to resistance training, volume is thought of as reps times sets times weight. But when you're exploring new ways of moving, you can also factor in things like intensity, duration, and time under tension. You can also factor in things like RPE, or rate of perceived exertion. It could be that overhead presses as a whole feel relatively easy to you because your central nervous system is conditioned to understand what that motion is, and so it feels relatively easy for your body, even if you're using a ton of weight. But maybe handstands feel really, really hard because your body's really not used to them. I think it's really important for people that come from a classical resistance training background to remember that other ways of moving can still produce gains if you are forcing your body to adapt in new ways. With resistance training, it's really easy to measure how you're forcing your body to adapt because it's just increasing volume when it comes to reps times sets times weight. And so it's super quantifiable. And so it can be kind of hard mentally to make that shift to practicing handstands being something that can cause your body to adapt, because it's not you can kind of apply reps and sets to practicing handstands, but as a whole, it's a very different style of exercise and you have to approach it in a very different way. All this is to say, your scaling back on resistance training does not have to be directly proportional to what you were doing before. You can absolutely completely quit traditional resistance training, like picking up weights and putting them back down, and still exercise in a way that is stimulating your muscles enough to maintain the muscle mass that you have. There are plenty of people who are jacked who do 0 resistance training, in the gym. Some people just have a very physically involved job, or they do calisthenics, or any number of other things. And even new forms of exercise itself is going to stimulate your muscle in a way that may elicit adaptation, or at the very least be enough of a stimulus to maintain muscle mass. So don't let yourself be limited or constrained by like traditional resistance training style, unless you want to. Like, obviously, if you want to keep in one day of lifting a weight, like, do that. My point is just that if you want to scale back to like 1/9 of your original volume in order to maintain muscle while doing other stuff, it doesn't have to be like directly proportional. So, you know, you could 1 day a week do 1 set of all of the compound lifts just to make sure you're hitting your entire body with enough volume to maintain muscle, and then 2 to 4 days of the week just do other fun stuff, yoga, Pilates, etc. Or you could do like 3 to 5 days a week of other stuff that is really activating your muscles in more of an anabolic way rather than a catabolic way. So like not cardio based stuff, but rather stuff that is just stimulating your muscle growth and strength. Speaking of cardio, this is something I probably should have touched on this a lot earlier. Cardio is not going to help you maintain your muscle mass. I've ranted about this before, but cardio and resistance training essentially send opposing signals to the body. Resistance training is anabolic, meaning it helps build muscle tissue. Cardio is catabolic, meaning it breaks down tissue. There's a reason that really good marathon runners tend to not have a lot of muscle, and that's because a lot of muscle is not advantageous for a lot of cardio. And so if you're doing a lot of cardio, your body is naturally going to start paring back muscle, especially if you're not resistance training to prevent that from happening. So if you are going to be doing regular cardio, then you might need to be doing more than 1/9 of your original resistance training volume in order to maintain that muscle. And that's a balance that, you know, you're gonna have to find for yourself, because I don't know how much cardio you're doing in the first place. But if you are doing cardio, just make sure you are balancing that out with enough resistance training. And then I think the last thing that's super important to remember is that even if you do lose some muscle, it is a lot easier for your body to build muscle a second time than the first time. And so, you know, if you're planning on just taking a break from resistance training for like 3 months because you got life stuff going on, or like something else is happening, you have a different exercise-based goal, whatever it might be, if you're just taking a short break and you know you're gonna be able to get back into it, I wouldn't stress too much about losing a couple pounds of muscle, because you're gonna be able to rebuild it really easily once you get back into resistance training. Really easily, like relatively easily. It's not gonna like immediately poof, be right back on your body, but like it's gonna be a lot easier to get it back. So to answer everyone's question about whether or not I am worried about losing muscle mass, essentially my answer is no. First of all, I'm very happy with the amount of muscle that I have on my body. If I lost a pound or 2 of muscle, I really wouldn't be too concerned. Like for someone my age, height, activity level, etc., I have as much muscle as I really need, at least as far as like health and longevity is concerned, which is my main concern. If I were starting off with a lot less muscle, maybe I would be a little bit worried, but like for me and my body, no. I also feel like with the types of exercise that I'm doing right now, I am stimulating my muscles enough to really kind of at least get 1/9 of the original volume that I was doing. If I were switching to like only yoga and running, yeah, I'd probably lose a good amount of muscle. But with the added like animal flow primal exercise that I am incorporating, that like really activates my muscles in a really difficult way. Like it's very strength based, and so I think that's really going to help me maintain. I think the only thing that I would maybe be concerned about is losing my glutes a little bit, because that's not getting activated as much with the type of exercise that I'm doing. So maybe I will throw in 1 set a week of like heavy hip thrusts, but even within that, like I'm not really concerned about losing like 1 inch off my glutes. Like it's not a big deal. It has been a few weeks since I have gone for a run. I hit like my 4-mile goal. I'm trying to work my way up to being able to run 10 miles. I hit 4 miles and then I don't even know what happened. I kind of just like stopped running. I did my trip to Greece with my mom and I have not run since then. So as I ramp back up with that, it is possible that I may start losing more muscle just because of how much cardio I may end up doing to get to 10 miles. I don't know how much longer that's gonna take me. I don't know how much running I'm gonna be doing. I'm kind of just gonna play that by ear. And if I am running and I start feeling like I'm losing muscle, you know, I'm gonna pay attention to my body. If I start looking like I'm losing muscle, or if I start looking more skinny fat, like if it looks like I'm reverse recomping, then yeah, maybe I will add some resistance training back in. Like, I'm just going to listen to my body, see how it responds to this kind of thing, and adjust accordingly. But for now, while I'm kind of just mostly focusing on like primal movement, animal flow, mobility, strength kind of stuff, not concerned. So I hope this video was helpful for some of you, especially for any of you that feel kind of trapped in your current training routine and are scared to scale back. Hopefully this gives you some reassurance that you should absolutely be able to do that without any major concerns for your body composition. But I think the important takeaway and just major thing to kind of focus on if you are trying to scale back and maintain body composition is just track. You can scale back slowly. It doesn't have to be all at once. You could go from 5 days a week to 4 days a week, see how your body responds. Go from 4 days a week to 3 days a week, see how your body responds. And the more you track when it comes to your calories and macros, but also your body composition through progress pictures, measurements, the scale, etc., the more data you're gonna have to just be able to see what's happening and respond accordingly. If I were super concerned about maintaining a specific amount of muscle and specific body composition, I would be tracking a lot more data and then just fine-tuning as I go. But again, I'm not super concerned. I'm just living my best fitness life, trying to enjoy it, and whatever happens, happens, really, for me. But let me know if you guys have any further questions about this topic. Would love to dive deeper if there's anything that you guys want to know. Leave any questions, comments, concerns you have down in the comments below. If you want to see more content from me all about health and fitness, you can check it out over here. To see future videos, make sure you hit that subscribe button, hit the little notification bell so you get notified when I post a video, and I will see you very, very soon. Bye!